I've said it before that we in the manosphere tend to take for granted the things that we know and we observe, the things that we've been, for some of us, discussing for years. And we tend to extrapolate from our own state of knowledge and being and our own observations into other people. We simply cannot fathom how it could be that somebody might think otherwise or indeed could be quote unquote blue pilled. Well, interestingly enough, I had a recent encounter with somebody who, by the lights of the manosphere, would have to be described as having lived under a rock. This was a female, ostensibly in her late 40s or early 50s, who appeared in the comment section of a video that I had looked at regarding online dating by one Dr. Grande. She can remain anonymous, it doesn't really matter. But the things she was writing were absolutely symbolic of that state of living under a rock, of simply being completely ignorant about one's own biology, about society, about how the world works, and specifically about how men and women work together, or actually don't work together. Let me read you off two snippets to get a sense of what I'm talking about. These are direct quotes. "I was on a site during my 40s a few years back, and I experienced total age discrimination in that men my age wanted younger women. This site had forums where people had discussions. I was very upset that the men were so insistent that they had a right to have younger women, even into their 60s and beyond. I was finding that this prejudice was making me very upset, and I eventually quit the site. I found that experiencing that type of discrimination right in front of me was very painful. One would learn about these attitudes the men had by reading or posting in the forums. I found that finding out in my 40s that men thought I was too old, even men my age and some in their 50s, was very damaging to my self-esteem. Triple exclamation mark. In addition, I've accomplished a lot in my life and have a master's degree in social work, along with extensive work and degrees in the arts. I have done an album of original songs on which I sing. I had a picture which is an excellent and very professional-looking picture of the cover of my album on the profile. I looked very attractive in the picture as it was taken by an excellent photographer in Los Angeles who knew what he was doing." There's more, but I'm not going to read it off. Suffice to say, when I first looked at this, I thought it was either a troll or something that just couldn't be real. The idea being that such a human being simply could not exist, man or woman, who actually thinks that, who's in a state of shock and calls men's mating and sexual preferences quote-unquote discrimination. Now, the irony here is that it was pointed out that this woman also had her preferences and therefore engaged in discrimination, specifically with regards to short men, which she admitted rather handily she had dismissed in their attempts at contacting her. So she gets all upset about age discrimination but has no problem with height discrimination. Frankly speaking, I have no problem with either. Preferences always exist and always have existed, and yes, they're a form of discrimination. Are you being discriminated against because you're not deemed to be tall enough to join the NBA, despite being quite athletic? A few make it, most don't if they're not sufficiently tall. That's discrimination. There's discrimination everywhere. The point of this, though, is that this woman was and is absolutely living under a rock. And it is reflective of something much, much bigger that's going on. Now, recently there was a Guardian article, that is the newspaper, that was titled "The Joys of Living and Dying Alone." It's simply a long ramble about how women are enjoying the single life and how great it is, and fewer are going to get married. And in that article, there was a statistic, allegedly cited by CNN, that by 2030, women between the ages of 25 and 44 in the United States, 45% of them will be single. They also cite in that article that men are not marriable because they're not making enough money. In fact, they say directly that these men are, quote unquote, too broke. And you might not make the connection between the initial woman I mentioned with her weird living under a rock thought processes and this article, but it's part of something bigger. The general state of cluelessness in the public when it comes to these so-called red pill issues. Because I'm a realist. I might be perfectly fine going my own way and being alone, but very clearly most people aren't. Most men aren't, and certainly most women aren't. The idea that everything's going to be hunky-dory, if in fact the statistic is true that by 2030, women between the ages of 25 and 44, 45% of them are going to be single, I can't imagine that going well on a macro scale. I can't imagine that being a good thing really for any parties involved. The thing you always know is about problems that are made into non-problems is that there's always a PR campaign. There's always something put out there to make it seem like it's innocuous or even good. So the whole thrust of this article, which will be posted in the link below, is that being single your entire life and dying alone is a good thing for women. And they're shaking off the tyrannical shackles and chains of marriage, and men are really bad and blah, 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 the usual. But why would you have to proclaim that so loudly to the world? You see this in all facets of life, frankly speaking. Let me take a topic that has nothing to do with this, but I might make a separate video about it one day because I find the amount of propaganda concerning it absolutely astounding and fascinating, and that's the issue of pit bull breeds. So pit bull breeds in the United States make up about 6 to 7% of the population of dogs, and yet are responsible for approximately 70% of the dog bites and well over 50% of the fatal dog bites. And there has been an ongoing propaganda campaign everywhere, on YouTube, everywhere, citing that pit bulls are actually great, that there are no problems whatsoever, that there are no heritable traits in dog breeds, that every dog is essentially the same, it's all based on the owner, there's no genetic component involved whatsoever, nothing. It all comes down to the owner. And as for the statistics, they don't even talk about the actual statistics. They just flat out ignore them. Pit bull breeds, that is, American Staffordshire Terriers, English Staffordshire Terriers, etc., were actually nanny dogs, dogs that accompanied very young children. No evidence for that whatsoever if you actually look into it. But the point I'm making here is less about pit bulls and more about the idea that when you have a problem that you don't want to be a problem, you engage in a PR campaign. So for pit bulls, pit bulls are great, they're cuddly, they're really nice, and there are no problems whatsoever, and I'm sure many of them are. It doesn't change the fact that they're still responsible for the most dog bites, and certainly doesn't change anything about the fact that they're responsible for the most fatal dog bites. And they outstrip every other breed, including mutts. Rottweilers come a distant second. So you need a PR campaign. You need to pretend that things aren't true. Well, that's what these women are doing. They're pretending everything is fine. They kind of accept the stats, but instead of looking inwards at their own possible flaws and the things that they might have done wrong, they blame men, as always. They say, well, these men are just too broke. They're not good enough for us. We're not going to marry them. Hypergamy, anyone? This is a problem that is going to be self-replicating down the line because, frankly speaking, most people out there are not informing themselves on these issues, women or men for that matter, and I do think it's a problem because most people, for whatever reason, seem to require some form of relationship, require this interaction with the opposite sex. The whole situation reminds me of that very potent quote from the New Testament, I believe it's Matthew 7:5, where the figure of Jesus Christ is alleged to have said, "You hypocrite, first remove the beam out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye." The idea being that attend to your own problems before accusing other people of problems. As always, these women are not reflecting at all on their own inadequacies, the decisions they made, the choices they made. It's always pointing to other people, specifically men. So men are too broke, and therefore this justifies the claim that women actually want to be single for their entire lives and die alone, which is probably very unlikely. And for the record, let me say, it's clear to me that men do better, if they have to be, when they're single. Women are the ones who are much more on average dependent on relationships. And we know this particularly with women who are younger, who are in constant relationship rotation, jumping from one to the next. And I think the time will have to come when the finger pointing and blaming men for every problem under the sun will have to cease. Because if all you do is point fingers and point to the specks in other people's eyes, specifically here in men's eyes, you're going to drive them away. Many men would like to be in relationships. Many men would like to marry. Most men, arguably. But if you're telling them that you're horrible, that you're too broke, and all these other delightful things, they're not going to have any interest. There are many men out there that find women's behavior utterly repellent, believe it or not, and want nothing to do with them as a consequence. I know many such men. They might be attracted to women, but that's where the buck stops, literally and figuratively. They find their behavior disgusting and repellent, then want nothing to do with them. So what are you going to do about that? And it's so revealing. Then they say, these men are just too broke. It's telling men, quite literally, giving them the right information, that all we care about is your wallet. None of this is going to go down well. And this is why I think people need to start getting educated about this at a much, much younger age. Forget about red pills, blue pills, living under a rock like this initial woman does, and like some of these women who are writing these articles and claiming everything is hunky-dory and peachy keen. They're going to get hit by a Mack truck. And that Mack truck is the reality of biology that nobody can escape. And I only wish, for the sake not of myself, because I'll be dead soon, but for others, that they become aware of this so they can work towards some kind of resolution. Again, most men want to interact with women, and most women want to interact with men. Say of that what you will, that's the tendency. Most men and women are obsessed with these romantic relationships, and therefore you're going to have to be honest about the content of these romantic relationships and what leads to them and what the problems are. And if you don't, you're going to end up like this seeming spinster who is bragging about degrees in social work and all the arts and the fact that she was discriminated against based on her age. I mean, cry me a river. We're at the stage now where, to be perfectly honest, it's very hard to have any sympathy for these people whatsoever. And try it a couple of years or decades down the line. Everyone, take care, and I'll check you out later if I'm still alive. Bye-bye.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.